Pick to move that the House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Andrew Weston.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it is a privilege to have secured this adjournment debate on age-disputed refugee children. And at the outset, I should declare that I am an officer of the APPG for refugees. Now, I know that the Minister will agree that there are few issues more important than the safety of children. But the current system for dealing with age-disputed refugee children is letting many of them down, with their safety and well-being put at risk as a result. The Helen Bamber Foundation, Humans for Rights Network and the Refugee Council have obtained data showing that over an 18-month period, from January 2022 to June 2023, more than 1,300 children were wrongly assessed to be adults by the Home Office. These incorrect assessments are usually the product of a short visual examination made by a border official almost immediately after these children arrive in the UK. What these incorrect assessments result in is children being placed in adult accommodation and immigration detention, exposing them to significant safeguarding risks, as well as denying them the support that they need to rebuild a life that has already been distorted by trauma and hardship. Of specific concern are cases of children being sent to Wethersfield or ending up in adult prisons. I will return to this point in greater detail later, but first I want to talk about why the current process for assessing the age of asylum seekers is problematic. Before I do, I want to thank the Refugee Council for their information that they have provided to me in advance of this debate. I also want to sincerely thank Omer, Motawakil and Emmanuel, the 3 young refugees wrongly assessed as adults who were kind enough to meet with me earlier this afternoon to share their experiences and are present in the chamber now. I would respectfully encourage the Minister to reach out to the Refugee Council to see if they could facilitate a similar meeting for her, as I found it both eye-opening and deeply moving. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, let me turn back to the issue of flawed assessment processes for children seeking asylum. The issue emerges from the fact that many children seeking asylum arrive here without a passport or birth certificate. This is often because they've never had such documentation, or it was taken from them during their journey to the UK, or they have fled such trauma that they were unable to collect any documentation they did have before fleeing. I understand that if a young person arrives here without ID, it can be difficult to determine their age, and no system for doing so will be perfect. But charities are also telling me of children arriving with ID, only to have this immediately set aside at the border. The current model, as I understand it, places the power to change a young asylum seeker's life in the hands of a border official, conducting an age assessment based on, and this is according to Home Office guidance, a person's appearance and demeanour. If said border official believes the asylum seeker is the age they claim to be, and their own judgment would be hugely variable from border official to border official, then they are placed into the care of the local authority, where further age assessments carried out by qualified social workers can take place if necessary, and support networks are more readily available. If, however, the border official believes a person's appearance and demeanour very strongly suggests that they are significantly over 18, then that person will face an age interview at a processing centre in Dover. It's not just refugee charities that have raised concerns about this process. Even the Home Office's own guidance makes clear that physical appearance is a notoriously unreliable basis for assessment of chronological age, and that demeanour can also be notoriously unreliable. What's more, the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration has described age assessments being undertaken at ports as perfunctory. Beyond the visual assessment, I'm aware that many refugees who have been through the process have raised concerns about the interviews that have been undertaken, including not being provided with the correct interpreter, being called liars, and facing inappropriate comments about their physical appearance. This is unacceptable, and the reason it is so worrying is that the stakes are so high. Because when children are incorrectly assessed as adults, they are placed into poorly supervised adult accommodation, hotels and detention centres. The safeguarding risks for these children is obvious. Some of them are as young as 14, sharing living accommodation with unrelated adults. Tragically, there have been multiple cases of these children being sexually and physically assaulted. Other children have witnessed suicide or self-harm by the traumatised adults in need of help themselves that they are living with. Even if they avoid this, children in these settings are still missing out on access onto the pastoral and educational support that they need to rebuild their lives. Many have reported being stuck in their hotel rooms for days on end with little or no information on how to challenge their age assessment and no certainty over their future. The toll this takes on their mental health and well-being is huge. Of the safeguarding referrals made to the Refugee Council relating to potential children staying in adult accommodation, the highest reported risk is suicide. The second highest risk is that the children abscond and we lose all sight of them, not knowing whether they have become homeless, destitute or exploited by someone offering them accommodation elsewhere. This is not alarmist, it is happening. Mr Deputy Speaker, I am afraid to say that the government's recent illegal migration legislation now poses further risks. Chief among them is that children are inadvertently sent to Rwanda. We know that last year there were numerous cases of children who had been detained as adults being issued with notices of intent to remove them to Rwanda on flights that ultimately never took off. The government recently rejected Baroness Lister's amendment to the Safety of Rwanda Bill, which would have ensured that children who have been wrongly assessed as adults by the Home Office would not be removed to Rwanda, while that decision was still being challenged. In light of this, I'd be grateful if the Minister could provide assurances that appeal rights regarding age assessments will be granted, and I implore her to ensure that people appealing their decision will not be removed until this process has taken place. These seem like reasonable steps to avoid traumatised children wrongly being sent halfway across the world. As well as addressing this issue, I'm sure that in her response, the Minister will want to talk about some of the measures that the Government has put in place to improve the age assessment process. I know this includes the recent authorisation of X-rays and MRIs in what are being called scientific age assessments and the establishment of a National Age Assessment Board. On the National Age Assessment Board, would the Minister address the concerns of the Refugee Council that this will not actually work with people who have just arrived in the UK and therefore won't impact initial age decisions? And on the use of X-rays or MRIs, could the Minister refer to any evidence showing that this process is more accurate than Merton-compliant age assessments carried out by qualified social workers, which are favoured by charities working in the refugee sector? Also, could I ask the Minister to explain what happens if an asylum seeker refuses an X-ray or MRI scan? For there is an important principle here, that medical consent should not be sought from a person under duress. And given possible issues with proposals put forward by the Government, will the Minister consider requests from the Refugee Council and others to limit the conduct of age assessments to fully qualified staff with relevant training? Regarding the safeguarding issues that I mentioned earlier, I also hope she'll consider ensuring the Home Office monitor what happens to people claiming to be children who the Home Office has determined are adults and establish proper processes so the Department can track the outcomes for those who are later found to be children. Even if the Minister chooses not to pursue these suggestions, I hope she will acknowledge that more needs to be done to improve the age assessment process for young asylum seekers. And I want to end, Mr Deputy Speaker, by reiterating what these children have been through. Driven from their homes, the places they loved, driven away by violence and persecution, separated from family and friends and forced to undertake an often perilous journey to the UK. These children should not face new risks to their safety when they get here, and they should not be thrown into the terrifying limbo that is the adult asylum detention system. Mr Deputy Speaker, they should be greeted with fairness and decency when they reach these shores. And I'm sure the Minister would agree these are fundamentally British values, so I look forward to hearing how the Government will uphold them when reforming age assessment processes for young asylum seekers?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Let me begin by expressing my thanks to the Honourable Member for Stretford and Ermston for securing this debate and for the sensitive way in which he presented these issues. Fairness and decency should indeed sit at the heart of our immigration and asylum system, particularly where it involves children. And it might be helpful if I set out in general terms the government's approach to age assessment. The age of a person arriving in the United Kingdom, I think as he observed, would normally be established from the documents with which they travelled, but many who claim to be children do not have documentary evidence to support their age. I'm sure there is no real point of disagreement between us and the opposition that there are very serious safeguarding risks if individuals over the age of 18 are treated as children and placed in settings with children. We all know about the high-profile case in Bournemouth last year of an adult man who was assessed as being 14 years old and in fact was wanted for a double murder in Serbia. We obviously want to avoid situations of that nature, and we are aware of other examples, in fact, where pupils in schools have raised an alarm at an obviously mature child or adult who has joined their class purporting to be a child, in one case where they were actually reassessed to be 10 years older than their claimed age. This reduces the valuable resource and support that is available to genuine children, but it also undermines public confidence. But of course, the government has always been clear that there are serious equivalent safeguarding risks if true children are treated as adults. I must just point out that there are incentives for adults to claim to be under 18, as unaccompanied children generally receive a higher level of support than adults in several respects. This includes the accommodation and support that they're provided with, the level of care that they will receive, perhaps therapeutic care, the procedural and substantive treatment of their immigration claim, and the arrangements that are needed to secure their possible removal and whether or not they can be detained in immigration detention. The legislative reforms that the government is bringing forward aim to make these assessments more consistent, more reliable and more robust from the outset. The Nationality and Borders Act, 2022, under Section 52, makes provision regarding the scientific method of age assessment. This is a new and vital tool for the assessment of age that the government needs to get right. The full plans for integrating scientific age assessments into the existing process will be set out very shortly. We accept that there is no single assessment method, scientific or not, which can determine an individual's age. However, in response to the Honourable Gentleman's challenge, I think, it is true to say that scientific methods offer the opportunity for significant improvement, and that is something that we should welcome wherever we sit on this debate. It should also be noted at the present time, the United Kingdom is one of the very few European countries that does not employ any scientific methods of age assessment. The Immigration Age Assessment Regulations 2024 came into force in January of this year, and they specify the use of X-rays and MRIs of certain body areas, including the wrist, to aid in age estimation as per the recommendations of the Age Estimation Science Advisory Committee. I hope I can reassure the Honourable Gentleman that this was an expert committee. It was established by the Home Office Chief Scientific Advisor. It comprised subject matter experts from a range of disciplines, including social work, dentistry, radiology, and they're to provide expert advice on potential scientific methods of assessment, as well as ethics and best practice for their use. I will give way.
Could she perhaps advise why the AESAC have encouraged the government to abandon scientific methods for assessment?
Well, I will gently repeat, we're not going to abandon scientific methods for age assessment. We are one of the only European countries who doesn't deploy any scientific methods, and we are working towards implementing that. I think I caveated my response in a fair way by accepting that there is no single method that will ever be truly reliable, but used in conjunction with others, and I'll come on to the Merton test, which he referred to in his speech in due course. We say that this is not just important progress, but vital progress in the fair and accurate assessment of age that goes to exactly the kinds of protections that he's primarily concerned about in bringing this debate. The combination of dental and skeletal images is important. It increases the accuracy of the approach. The committee advocate for a likelihood ratio method which offers a logical and consistent summary of the evidence, and it permits greater confidence, particularly in the range of age assessment of whether the claimed age is possible. Having specified the scientific methods in these regulations, where an individual refuses to consent without reasonable grounds to the use of those methods, a decision maker must take that refusal to consent as damaging the credibility of the age-disputed person. That is referred to as a negative inference. It wouldn't automatically preclude an individual from being considered as a child. That refusal will be taken into consideration alongside other evidence as part of the Merton-compliant age assessment process. Nonetheless, it will be relevant. Let me also clarify the current process on initial age investigations. The Honourable Gentleman is correct that on arrival, the initial assessment is undertaken by an immigration officer. The threshold that they must apply is that they may only treat an individual as an adult where 2 Home Office members of staff assess that their physical appearance and demeanour very strongly suggests that the individual is significantly over the age of 18. This is a deliberately high threshold, and the principle of the benefit of the doubt is key, and means that where there is doubt, an individual will be treated as a child pending further observation and consideration by a local authority. This approach has been confirmed by the Supreme Court in the landmark case BF Eritrea and the Secretary of State from the Home Department in 2021. Where doubt remains after initial age assessment has been undertaken, the local authority will conduct a more in-depth assessment known as the Merton-compliant age assessment, which he's already made references to. Merton assessments are holistic, social worker-led assessments and must adhere to principles that have been set out by the courts in the case of the Crown and the London Borough of Merton, the well-established public law case, as well as subsequent case law. But we do know that these tests are not sufficiently precise. They depend entirely on oral questions being put to the individual. So to strengthen these assessments, the Nationality and Borders Act allows local authorities to refer age assessments to designated officials of the Home Office who form the National Age Assessment Board. The board launched in March of last year. It currently consists of 42 expert social workers and aims to increase capacity and expertise in the system until we have scientific methods working alongside it. As well as conducting assessments for local authorities, the board supports them with training and best practice advice. And lastly, through the Illegal Migration Act 2023, the government has taken further steps to ensure that the process is as robust as possible. Section 58 of this Act introduces a regulation-making power which would allow the Secretary of State to set out the effect of a decision by an individual not to consent to the use of a specified scientific method for age assessment. These regulations could in the future specify that a person who refuses to consent without reasonable grounds is to be treated as if the decision maker had decided they were over the age of 18. This power will not be used unless and until the Home Secretary determines that the science and analysis is sufficiently accurate to support providing for an automatic assumption of adulthood. Under Section 57 of the Act, judicial reviews will not suspend removal to avoid lengthy age disputes delaying or preventing the removal of those who've been age assessed to be adults. In closing, once again, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for securing this debate, raising what is indeed a sensitive issue and where accuracy really does matter. And I think, whatever the dispute, we do agree on that point. Age assessment is critical to the integrity of our system, but also, of course, to the protection of genuine children. We understand that it's crucial that these assessments are robust, they're consistent, they're well evidenced, to ensure that genuine children are not incorrectly treated as adults, but also that adults are disincentivised from knowingly misrepresenting themselves as children. I will, yes.
I thank the Minister for giving away again. She's being incredibly generous. In order to further the attempts at accuracy, could I press her on the point that I made in my speech about perhaps further monitoring of those whose claim of being a child is rejected at the border. For at the moment, we have no data that shows how many of them are overturned later, other than that pulled together by the charities I referred to earlier, who found that between January 22 and June 23, there were 1,300, and I understand that there have been some 600 since then. It would be incredibly helpful if the government were to start tracking that information, monitoring it moving forward. It would improve their own data and take us, I think, some way to having greater certainty that the government is on top of this issue.
Minister.
I think I could most helpfully actually undertake if he would be willing to write to the Immigration Minister, and I've tried to think about which of the two it would apply to, and I'll get my office to clarify that. But if he was to write to the Immigration Minister, I will of course relay what's happened in this debate and ask him to reply specifically with reference to what the Refugee Council has drawn to your attention in terms of numbers and miscategorisations in that 12-month period that you referred to. This is an important issue, and as I have set out, one that the government approaches with the seriousness and I hope the sensitivity that this House would expect.
Question is that this House to stand adjourned. Does many of that opinion say aye? Contrary, no? The ayes have it. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.